and establish a sustainable revenue and spending outlook for the state. And I suspect this is a question you have gotten before. This question will have 3 minutes instead of the usual 2 minutes, and we'll begin with Mr. Angeli.
Clearly, it's time for the state to get serious about addressing its budget challenges. We should all be able to agree that there is a structural budget problem in Louisiana when the two most important metrics when we measure economy are the number of people working and the productivity of those people that are in fact working. And we are pegging the needle right now in both of those metrics. We have the highest non-farm employment we've ever had in the state, producing the highest gross domestic product we've ever had in the state, yet yielding a $1.6 billion deficit for state government. The reality is that government has grown too much over the last decade, and now we are feeling the pains as it shrinks down to an appropriate size that taxpayers can't afford. Our problem, in my opinion, is that we are relying on an outdated, failed system of taxation and budgeting. We need to hit the reset button, and we need to go back to the drawing board on both sides, the tax system and the budget side. To borrow a phrase from a popular TV show, it's time for an extreme makeover. First, we will need a special session to address comprehensive tax reform. Louisiana has a messy and complicated tax code. We've mitigated that messy and complicated tax code only by countless incentives, credits, and rebates intended to make us more competitive. And we've done that in a piecemeal fashion without a holistic view. It has now become an unsustainable model in our state. Many of these credits, rebates, incentives, some going back decades, are no longer producing a return on our investment, and we've responded with a result and a reaction to place the burden on our healthcare providers and our students. As governor, I will immediately work towards reforms to enact a fair, transparent, competitive tax code, allowing state leaders to finally be able to create a balanced, sustainable budget that reflects the priorities of the people of Louisiana. You know, in 1989, Governor Roma had a great idea, and he saw the need for a revenue estimating conference called the REC. It's now time for an ERC, an exemption review conference, which I have proposed to review all tax credits and all exemptions and their economic impact, and to provide the legislature, the board of directors of the state of Louisiana, with the information needed to make sure taxpayers are in fact getting what we're paying for. If the exemption is growing, creating jobs, and strengthening our families, we ought to keep it. We ought not throw the baby out with the bathwater. But if the exemption is failing to accomplish its intended purposes, we ought to have the courage to bring it back to the legislature for consideration. Keep in mind that we have a $9 billion general fund with a $7 billion tax exemption budget. Second, we must reform our antiquated budgeting process. Louisiana for too long has locked down and dedicated tax revenues for so many specific purposes that now we have no money available when our economy shrinks to be able to do the things we need for our higher education and chopping blocks. How many budget hearings must we go through? How many mid-year budget cuts must we face? We've been through different governors from different parties, from different regions of the state, and still we continue to have this problem. I want to be the governor that works with the legislature, not dictating to the legislature, to finally end this dysfunctional cycle.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Darden.
Well, one thing we don't need is another study, and I'm going to go fast because I want to answer you specifically, and I want to tell you what we need to do right now during this session and what we need to do long term. The inventory tax got out of the committee yesterday simply to have a vehicle, I think, for talking. But I would hate to see this legislature make long-term decisions in the short-term crisis that we're facing right now. And that inventory tax problem has to be addressed in the overall context of what our tax system is going to look like. Because we as a state have said to local governments, you're going to have this source of revenue. And it's in the Constitution. It takes a constitutional amendment. That's not going to solve the immediate problem. First, let's decide how much we need. There's a $1.6 billion shortfall. Let's decide if we have to find $1.6 million, or can we continue to cut in some areas, not as drastically as being proposed in higher ed, I say first and foremost. And then what kind of revenue do we need that we can get quickly? First thing that comes to mind is a cigarette tax. The cigarette tax is going to generate money immediately and would make us competitive with sister states if we don't make it any more than what they're charging. That's a realistic way that we have to try and find some money. Eliminate the solar tax credit. Reduce the horizontal drilling exemption by 50%, but extend it out for 3 years to capture some money from that, because right now we're depleting those wells quicker than what the exemption contemplated, so there's no money to get. reduce the enterprise zone and the research and development tax credits by some reasonable percentage. Cap the motion picture tax credit. I'm the biggest supporter of that you can find. It was my bill in 2002. It's been great for the state, but in these times we have to put a limit on it. We have to tighten it up and still remain competitive with other states. Cut the legislative and the judicial budgets. They haven't been cut at all during these times of budget crisis, and those budgets have a little room. Don't have sales tax holidays. You piece all these things together, and they're going to generate a degree of revenue for the state in the short term. Long term, let's reduce the income tax top rates and dramatically reduce the exceptions, the exclusions, and the credits. Minimize refundable credits so the state is not writing checks to people. Only allow those credits to be applied to a tax debt that is owned. Create local tax opportunities for local governments to go to the people and say, this is what we're going to do with your money, this is where we're going to use it. Local governments are the best government to respond directly to the people's needs. People don't always vote for taxes. We see that all the time, but we give them options, we give them choices. We've created a Mardi Gras mentality in Louisiana at state government. Once a year, the assembled masses go to the state capitol with hands outstretched, and the king sitting on the fourth floor and the members of the carnival crew on the first floor throw out the trinkets and the beads and the goodies in forms of money that go to local governments all across the state, and we can't have that dependency anymore. We've got to be realistic. Look at the inventory tax refund situation. The state's got to take care of the state's interests first, and that's the biggest dilemma we're facing right now.
In 3 minutes. Mr. Edwards, your turn.
Thank you. And your laryngitis is getting better, Jay.
It's not.
This is
how
the
you
most
say it, it's what you
this
say.
is the most critical issue facing Louisiana today. We have a structural budget deficit. This is the 7th year where we've had a revenue shortfall, and the forecast for each of the next 5 years calls for a revenue shortfall of between $1 billion and $2 billion. Despite what you might have heard, the shortfall was $1.2 billion before oil dropped a penny below the forecast. This is the result of years of mismanagement and cobbling together through ad hoc fashion one budget after another, relying on too much one-time money. It's going to require strong bipartisan leadership. I will offer that leadership because we have to make tough choices, else we're never going to be able to invest in our critical priorities like higher education, health care, and transportation infrastructure in the way that we all think we should. First, we should reduce or eliminate tax giveaways that cost too much and produce too little of a benefit. Tax expenditures, be they exemptions, exclusions, deductions, credits, rebates, whatever you want to call them, these are tax expenditures. We can reduce those expenditures, create savings, and reallocate to higher priority items. And we need to cap and sunset and review these things. And we don't need another study. The legislature just paid for a good study. Dr. Richardson did it. We can use that as a starting point. We can get started right away. Secondly, we need to accept our federal tax dollars back into Louisiana to help us meet our obligations here, whether it's health care through the Medicaid expansion, whether it's pre-K money that we turned down, whether it was money that would enhance the rail connection between Baton Rouge and New Orleans and deliver us our people and our commerce much better between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. Also, we've turned down money to enhance high-speed internet access in rural areas that would also unlock a lot of potential for economic growth and job creation. We need to grow the economy in a way that produces net new revenue. The big disconnect in Louisiana today is we have this booming economy. But no state in the nation has cut higher education more than the state of Louisiana in the last 8 years. How do you account for that? We've got to stop incentivizing this job creation to the point where there's not net new revenue to meet the burdens that come with it. We also should make sure that we don't outsource tax and fiscal policy to special interest group in Washington, D.C., so that at the end of the day, we have a lot of gimmicks going on in Louisiana like we have right now. The idea that we should increase the cigarette tax in order to provide money to higher education, but you can't do that without creating a new fee on our students and a new tax credit is ridiculous. And also, this inventory tax repeal is another gimmick to try to get the approval for Grover Norquist so that we can do something that's, at the end of the day, not going to improve the state's bottom line. If you just take the money you're currently giving to businesses who pay the inventory tax and give the same amount to local government, you haven't improved your bottom line at all. It is a gimmick, and we need to stop governing ourselves in this way and get real and offer real solutions.
All right, now we're ready to hear from Mr.
This is the huge challenge for the state that's front and center right now. In fact, I don't think it's overstatement to call it a crisis. What I said months ago is that the minute I'm sworn in as governor, I'll immediately call a special legislative session focused exclusively on fundamental spending reform and fundamental tax reform. That's what we should be doing now. We're not. I'll do that the minute I'm sworn in as governor. And when we do that under my leadership, there won't be any boundaries put on the discussion or the deliberations set by folks in Washington or anywhere else. Everything will be on the table. Now, I've also said very specifically I would look at 4 big areas in that special legislative session. First of all, on the spending side, to get after fraud and abuse and things we simply can't afford, we need to undedicate a lot of areas of the state budget that are dedicated now where our hands are tied. We need to create much greater flexibility so that when any cuts happen, they don't happen disproportionately to key areas like higher ed. Number 2, on the tax side, we need to go through all of our state tax credits and exemptions and deductions with a fine-tooth comb, with a magnifying glass, and analyze them through a sober cost-benefit analysis, see what makes sense for the state taxpayer, and some do, see what does not make sense, and some clearly, like in my opinion the solar tax credit, clearly do not. Number 3, I think we need to look to try to cut rates in certain areas to produce greater economic growth, and with that growth, revenue. And number 4, there's one specific area of the state budget that I would actually put greater protections on, and that is the Transportation Trust Fund. We need to rebuild trust, voter trust, citizen trust in the Transportation Trust Fund and stop that from being used as a piggy bank to fund all sorts of other things. In addition, I would look at our sales tax collection. We need a far more standardized method of sales tax collection with a uniform base and more of a state collection system that can help us consider internet sales tax and other issues. And also the inventory tax. I strongly disagree with Governor Jindal's current proposal on the inventory tax because it would, bottom line, be a big tax increase to job creators. And they would react by moving activity out of Louisiana. That's bad. We have to avoid that. What I've proposed specifically is to do away with the inventory tax altogether so that businesses don't even have to do the paperwork even though they may be reimbursed in the future, and replace that revenue stream to local government with other local revenue opportunities or some direct payment from the state. That would accomplish a lot of things, lower the burden on business, keep local government whole, but not have this ever-increasing liability on the state taxpayer year after year after year.